guys are in for a treat today. This is a very special topic. Dr. Justin Patchin is here to talk about social media and kids' use of technology. And I'm guaranteeing you, everybody listening, this pertains to you because you deal with students, or maybe you're a parent, right? And how they use social media and how they're using technology can be an issue. And Justin is the expert. He is a professor at the University of Wisconsin-Eau, and he's also heads up with his friend Samir Hinduha, the Cyberbullying Research Center. He's actually been studying this for almost 25 years. He's written several books, and we are getting down to brass tacks, like, the basics of, how kids are using social media today, what they need to watch out for, what you as a school district can really do to help students and help parents. We're going to also get into some resources that can then help you deal with this. We talk about sexting. We talk about the real stories, and I share a few things that I've had to deal with to give you some practical advice as well. So very excited for you to dive into this episode. Now, my ask in doing this episode is 254. Man, we've been doing this podcast a long time. We got a lot of great resources out there. Will you share this episode with at least one person, but maybe it's your whole staff, okay? Because I think this is a topic that's really going to pertain. So share this with someone that deserves to hear, that wants to listen, wants to learn, and wants to help our students deal with what they're dealing with today. Okay. Now let's get into this week's K-12 PR tip quickly before we get into our episode with Dr. Justin Patchin. All right. Today's K-12 PR tip. So many changes happening, and Instagram's making a bunch of them. Meta's announcing a lot of different ones, but just want to say that Instagram recently changed over to a 4x5 versus a square. Okay. So this means on your grid, typically your posts, your newsfeed posts have been in a square dimension. Okay. Now they're 4x5. So basically like a 4-inch wide by 5-inch high mode. And when you are sharing something on Instagram, you're going to want to make sure that your image or your graphic is cropped to that. Now, my tip is that on your photos, you can actually go and you can hit the edit. And what I do on my iPhone is I go to the crop and I hit crop twice, and all these options come up for me with different dimensions. And there's one that says 4x5. And I can automatically drag and kind of crop the image to the 4x5 and save it on my camera roll like that. Okay. So again, I go in and I select the picture. Okay. And I'm going to click the edit button. It gives me like the auto, the adjust, the filters, but one of them says crop. I hit crop, and then I hit crop again. And then it gives me all these sizes, and one of them is 4x5. You can also do this on your desktop when you're loading things up into like Meta Business Suite. You have the option of cropping your images right in Meta Business Suite, and there is a 4x5 feature. Typically, in the past, you've used the square because that's what you've had to use. But Meta has adjusted and it is asking you now to do it a 4x5 for Instagram. This tip will hopefully really help with that content. Now let's get to today's episode with Dr. Justin Patchin. I am so excited. I have a very special guest today, Dr. Justin Patchin. Justin, welcome to the show.
I'm very glad to be with you, Andrea.
It seems like yesterday I was starting out my business with social media. And at first I was doing a little bit of trying to keep kids safe online, but oh my gosh, it is a hard job. So I've pivoted a little bit, but now it's been almost 11 years and you are doing big things. So I just really love you to introduce yourself to the audience, kind of share your background and your role there at UW-Eau Claire, and then also the Cyberbullying Research Center.
Sure, has it been 11 years? Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
That's wild. I remember us having coffee in the coffee shop in Eau Claire, and that seems like it was about 2 weeks ago. Anyways, so I am Justin Patchin. my day job is I teach criminal justice at UW-Eau Claire. I'm in my 21st year on campus. Prior to that, I was at Michigan State University for 5 years doing my graduate work and teaching some classes there. Did my undergraduate work at UW Superior. I grew up in far northern Minnesota, but I teach criminal justice and kind of pre-law classes, but my research has long focused on how teens use and misuse technology. So I became interested in these questions in about 2000 or 2001 while in graduate school. I've always been interested in kids and school issues and bullying. And I met a guy who went to Michigan State to study kind of computer crime and high-tech crime. And we were just talking about the ways that teens were starting to use technology in problematic ways and causing harm to their peers. And as budding academics, the first thing we did was look to see if anybody was studying this sort of harassment. We might need to take a break. I think my dogs are barking up a
Oh, yeah,
storm.
I can
Maybe that's
hear.
just the nature of the podcast, but
Yeah, they just knew you were going to be
they
on.
knew it was on cue. But anyway, so
Yeah.
we've been basically looking at how teens use and misuse technology for almost 25 years. We focused on originally on cyberbullying. We still look into cyberbullying, but we pretty much, try to do the best we can predict the next thing. So we've looked at sexting and other digital forms of harm and sextortion, and now we're interested in AI and its implications for teens' use of technology. But the real crux of what we try to do is take sort of evidence or data and apply that to these problems because there's a lot of kind of hyperbole and a lot of speculation about what's bad and what's problematic, but we go right to the source. So we've surveyed, I don't know, 40 or 50,000 middle and high school students over the last 20 years. We've surveyed parents, teachers, police officers, other adults that work with kids. And we use those data. Of course, we're academics, so we write academic papers, but we write books, we write blog posts. We have a website, cyberbullying.org, that we try to translate the data into information that adults can use to help kids online, but also, information for kids themselves. So I know that's a lot, but we really, my research partner who's at Florida Atlantic University, his name's Samir Hinduja, he and I really consider ourselves kind of action researchers in the sense that we want to do things to make the world better. We don't just want to sit in our, ivory towers and write papers and crunch data. We do that, but we want it to actually mean something in the ways that people are using technology. We don't think technology is inherently bad. It's a tool, and like any tool, it can be used for good or ill. And so with some, knowledge and skills, information, I think we can make those experiences better for kids.
So your focus on data and research and turning that in, I just want to say like all of my APRs listening are like just clapping because we are all about, school communication and deeply rooted in the RPI process of research and planning, implementation and evaluation. And so I know that there's a lot of people that are happy to hear, that you guys have dug into all of the numbers and are, we can speculate and we can say, well, this is bad or but it's great to have the data. And I've got one of your books, one of your many books with me today, The Bullying Today, Bullet Points and Best Practices. And we'll get into some of that. But today I really wanted to focus on the student use of social media. And it's kind of a pivot from what I normally talk about on this podcast, but it impacts every single one of my listeners. So can you start by sharing like how teens are using technology today and some of the biggest issues that this use is causing when it comes to social media?
Yeah, I think, social media is as attractive to teens as it's ever been. The diversity of platforms, I think that's maybe somewhat new. I mean, it used to be young people would focus on a particular platform. It's like they'd be all over Instagram or they'd be all over Snapchat. Now, I think they're everywhere. I mean, across the gamut, they're, it seems to me, balancing four or five of these different of active accounts on these different platforms. We know the research shows that they're actively using Snapchat and TikTok, Instagram to some extent, but they're I think they're producing more than they ever have before. They're content creators. And, of course, there are the concerns about, the cyberbullying, the mistreatment, the misogyny, all the bad things. But I think there's also, which, again, there's ways we can deal with that and address those things. But I think there is a concern about maybe overuse and being on social media until 1 or 2 in the morning. I usually tell parents, like, there's nothing super inherently wrong with these technologies, but nothing good happens online after about 11 p.m. So, that a lot of the really bad things we see happen where kids get caught up in situations are because it's midnight or 1 in the morning and, they're sleep deprived and they're, alone in their room with their device and getting into all sorts of problems. And so I think we help to minimize those problems by kind of restricting when kids have access to technology because we got to protect them from themselves. I mean, I think many adults need protection from that. I wake up at 2 in the morning and I can't sleep and I put on TikTok and now it's 2 hours I'm awake instead of maybe 15 minutes. But it's the same as any other situation they might find themselves in. I think the key is that we as adults who care about kids create opportunities for them to turn to us if they run into trouble, but also creating pathways for them to learn ways to avoid that trouble. And that isn't, restricting access all the time. It might be restricting access certain times. As you know, probably better than anybody, the big debate over technology in schools, right? It's been fascinating over 20 years to track the BYOD, bring your own device, and every school providing a Chromebook, or some schools not affording it. So bring your device so we can use it. And technology in schools is good. Technology in schools is bad. It's back and forth. And I don't know that we have any research-based recommendations there or at least any firm like technology is good in schools, technology is bad in schools, but it's like anything, right? So if they're using it for productive purposes, it can be amazing if they're being distracted by it, if they're cheating using it, if they're bullying others using it, that's a problem. So typically when it comes to technology in schools, I suggest the school administrators and the teachers focus more on the behaviors they're concerned about rather than the technology. So the technology in and of itself isn't, again, inherently bad, but it is bad if they're being distracted by a notification every 30 seconds because it's in their pocket or, they're tempted to look at it when they're taking the exam. So we have to create opportunities to kind of remove those distractions and possibilities in those circumstances.
Yeah. So really with like the sleep deprivation, I mean, I'm huge on this. I've been just listening to a lot of different podcasts. Now that it's beginning of the year, I'm a parent of 6 kids. And now Justin, I mean, they were little when I was with you before. Now they're
Hmm.
17 to 25. Like I only got 2 left in high school. It's crazy. Um, but schools really absorb all these issues. And what are some proactive, I mean, you mentioned a few of those things, but what are some proactive things that schools can do to possibly help these students or potentially these families deal with some of these issues?
Yeah, I think it can start with education and
Mm.
reminding students and families about the research on sleep deprivation, the fact that their brains are developing at such a rate in those middle adolescent years that they really need this sleep. To say nothing of the fact that I don't know about your household or the schools you work with, but the sicknesses that run rampant through schools. Like my kid's sick at the moment, and it's just you can't run your body so ragged and not get enough sleep, right? So even just constant reminders. Another sort of simple example, like even in my classes that I teach, a lot of students will take notes using their laptops, maybe even their phones, which I don't know how they do that, but they do that. And there's actually pretty good research to show that if you handwrite the notes, you'll remember it better.
Mm.
And so obviously I don't require them to handwrite their notes. They can do whatever they want. And again, it works better for some students over others. I present them with the research and say, look, if you're really interested in doing well in this class, attend class, if get good notes in any way you can, but there is some research suggesting if you handwrite it, it'll be better, better memorize it or remember it. And it's the same thing with these other things. Look, getting 8, 9 hours of sleep a night, turning off your device 30 to 45 minutes before you want to go to bed because of all the light and the impact it has on you. And And the social media platforms are designed to be sticky, right? I mean,
Mhm.
you've seen, if you've been on TikTok, you've seen that nice lady that pops up that says, maybe you've been scrolling a little too long, maybe you need to take a break, right? And so it's designed that way. And so we have to take the initiative as parents to remind our kids because, they're not in a, developmental state to sort of just turn it off. So we have to remind them that, look, you need to turn this off at a certain point, otherwise it's going to negatively impact your sleep. And that's another thing, just more broadly speaking, when it comes to screen time and social media use and focusing on the behaviors. So when parents touch base with me about their concerns about how much tech their teens are using, I ask them to think about the implications that that tech is having on them. So ask them, are they getting enough sleep? Are they doing well at school? Are they getting their homework done? Are they getting enough physical activity? Right? Because you got to stay active. I mean, I don't think it's healthy for a kid to sit, in a chair for 6 hours reading a book, honestly. I mean, they need to move, they need to get around. Are they getting enough social interaction with others? So if you can check off all these books or all these boxes, are they relatively healthy in terms of their mental health? Because kids go through ups and downs, but if they're going through a stage where they're down for long periods of time, something's up. So if they're doing pretty well, if they're getting their schoolwork done, if they have good social relationships with their friends and getting good sleep, then a little bit of time on social media isn't that big of a deal, right? Assuming those experiences are positive.
Yeah. Oh, those are really good. So you gave a lot of uh practical advice, especially for parents, but in some cases our educators become those parents because some kids don't have that at home. And so getting enough sleep, the good grades, the physical activity, the mental health, and then just as you were saying about the how addicting it is, obviously it is. It's designed to keep you on there.
Hmm.
And my husband was just telling me last night that my oldest stepson is a senior, and they were watching some NFL football. We're in NFL football playoffs right now, but he was teaching him how to juggle. And
Hmm.
my stepson is he when he gets focused on something, he's very competitive, one, and my
Hmm.
husband's a pretty good juggler. And it was like after that, he was just focused on it and he, was working on that. And I was just thinking, that is so healthy because otherwise, many times you're watching something and you're on your phone. And
Hmm.
so it's a little bit of physical activity. I don't
It's
know, but
movement. Yeah,
yeah, yeah. So, anyways, I just if we can give kids something different to focus on,
that's it.
I think that can be helpful. So, but it's a good point too. Just, I mean, my girls are definitely trying to focus a little more on reading, and they read for pleasure. And just some of the books that they like to read. And I know on their dream board for this year is to read more, but not
Hmm.
probably not for 6 hours at a time, like you said, just
Right.
sitting in a chair. So
Or again, maybe they get caught up in that one book and they do read for 6 hours, but it's not every day, right? I bet if you
yeah.
looked at your kids' screen time, it'd be 5, 6, 7 hours every single day on that device. And so that's where it potentially becomes problematic.
Right.
And so yeah,
Yeah.
everything in moderation.
Yeah. I just want to also note that I am taking notes with a pen and paper right now.
There you
So
go. You'll remember it.
hey, I've been doing that since high school and it does seem to work for me. So I like it. Um, you often talk to students. I'm not sure how often you're out there,
Mhm.
talking to students but when you talk with them, how are you able to really illustrate just how impactful, their own activity is on social media as far as for their own health, but also for the impact on other people?
Yeah, I do it fairly often. I was just in New Jersey last week talking to about 1,200 high schoolers. I'll be speaking at a relatively local school here on Thursday. I really enjoy talking with students, honestly, and I tell them this. I say, you're my favorite group of all the different audiences I speak to. You're my favorite. Some people can't stand, or maybe can't stand isn't the right word, are really fearful of speaking in front of, let's say, middle school students, right? Or high school students. I love it. I love it because they hold you accountable, especially middle school students. You can't really BS them. You can't, pretend you know what's going on when you don't. You really have to know your stuff. I think that's the key. And I do know the technology. And if I mess something up or if I'm wrong about a particular setting, they'll tell me afterwards. They'll say, "Well, no, actually, this," and it's fascinating. And plus, technology is a big part of their lives, so they can really resonate with what I study. So I think that speaks to my connection with young people. Is I understand the tech, I understand their mindset. I'm not going to get on stage in a huge assembly and say, "Don't use technology." I'm going to give them examples of situations where their peers have messed up. I'm going to give them tools that they can use if they find themselves in a difficult situation. The reality is the most, um, let's say, harmful or problematic issues that kids can get involved in typically result from something bad happens online, and they maybe try to deal with it themselves, and it gets worse and it gets worse, but they don't have an adult they can trust to talk to, right? So I encourage students to find that adult. Maybe it's not their parent for whatever reason. Maybe it's not, I used to say talk to the school counselor because they're usually great about these things. And that's true in the vast majority of cases. But then I had a couple of students say, well, our school counselor doesn't really understand technology and doesn't understand, and so I said, well, find somebody. Maybe it's a favorite teacher, maybe it's the principal, somebody who understands, because you really, especially when it gets to be these significant issues, you need an adult in your corner to help address them. Because for the most part, the vast majority of educators are in that field because they care about kids. They want to see you succeed. They want to see you do well and thrive. And of course, they're dealing with all the other issues that are facing them in terms of testing and delivering content and all this kind of stuff. But the real problem is when the kid feels alone, especially in their peer group, if everybody's sort of going after them or they feel like they're isolated. So I try to encourage them to find an adult that they can trust, and I do tell them if you can't find anybody, you can always find me. I give them my email address, and occasionally kids will email me, and I'll try to direct them to resources when I can. But I just be real with them, honestly. I don't try to sugarcoat anything. You kind of, I have to modify a little bit about what I talk about because usually I'm talking in school settings, and so I can't, give many of the examples that probably aren't school appropriate. But and I sort of when I do speak, I give examples, but then I apply maybe a more vanilla example to something more serious, so you can see how this will become more serious and try to really protect kids when they get into these situations online. So I think the key in working with youth is being genuine, being real, and being honest. And if you don't understand like an app or a game or even if you don't understand the harm involved, right? Because early on, when I was studying cyberbullying, and I still am, I think parents had a hard time recognizing how hurtful something on a screen could be because that's our adult brains saying just ignore it, just delete it, it's no big deal. But that's not how kids' brains work. And so if you don't understand, if you just can't grasp it, ask them. So how is this impacting you? Well, I don't want to go to school because of it. Or, try to get in their shoes and remember what it was like to be an adolescent. Um, and I think they're willing to listen. I think they're hungry for information as long as it's genuine, as long as
Yeah.
it's legit.
Well, I've seen you on stage, and I can tell everybody listening if you're looking for a speaker, I mean, it's just so relevant. And like you said, you don't get up there and like pretend you know it all or even
Hmm.
say technology is bad because I think we've all had those people at our school, well, you just shouldn't be on it. And so it's like, well, that's not
It's not
realistic.
realistic. Yeah.
And then what I also love is that you have like specific examples and all this stuff probably has happened or obviously could happen in their school. So they're going
Hmm.
to know
Hmm.
somebody that took a bad picture, an inappropriate picture and sent it to somebody and then it got,
Hmm.
circulated.
Hmm.
And then just, for your practical advice of just having somebody, and again, sometimes, yeah, it's not your parents because some kids get scared. I mean, you talk about like sexting and then sextortion and, some of that stuff. And it's like, then people are embarrassed. And so is that something you also talk about a little bit that you still got to reach out and get help?
Yeah, I mean, when you're talking about the sexting and the sextortion, I mean, the sextortion being a huge issue right now and of concern, I don't often directly talk about sexting in my presentations unless I'm asked to, because it
Okay.
can be a touchy subject.
Yep.
In some cases, I am asked because there are issues, and it's just something that needs to be addressed, especially with older kids. But I do talk about it indirectly in terms of sharing content with others, and you never know where that might end up,
Hmm.
and the trouble it can cause. I know there are some, particularly law enforcement partners like an SRO, will just t tell the students that, look, if you share this inappropriate picture, it's going to be you're going to end up on the sex offender registry, or it's child pornography. And technically, it is considered child pornography, but the reality is, most times, thankfully, law enforcement isn't pursuing those situations in that way. So if a police officer says this is what's going to happen, and the teens know that it's not because they've seen their friends do it and they haven't gotten into trouble, it's just not going to be real with them. You definitely need to explain to them the potential significant consequences, but I think you need to also talk about the more pressing concerns about their reputation and what would your parents think if they knew that you shared this, and trying to be more real with what the actual consequences might be. And Samir and I wrote a somewhat controversial paper 4 or 5 years ago. It was published in the Journal of Adolescent Health that the title was "It's Time to Teach Safe Sexting." And so we make the argument we should teach them safe sexting like we teach safe sex and comprehensive sex education. And as you can imagine, there was a visceral reaction to that paper on both sides. People loved it or they hated it. There was nobody in between. There was love or hate. But I will say this, a lot of the people that emailed me or contacted me, touched base with me about it that were sort of negative, once I explained the perspective, first of all, most of them didn't read it. They saw the title and then they
Right.
thought this is terrible.
Yeah.
But once I explained the sort of purpose, they sort of at least understood why we were advocating for what we were advocating. And we say this in the paper. We're not sure that this is. We haven't researched this. We're just saying this is something we need to have a conversation about. And
Hmm.
based on research on comprehensive sex education, it's done amazing at preventing teen pregnancies and STIs and all these really good things. We want to try to prevent the worst consequences associated with sexting, including sextortion and those images being shared beyond their original target. And that's kind of what we advocate for. So we're
Yeah.
not afraid to, say things that might be controversial if we can back them up based on a little bit of science, but then at least just have the conversation.
Yeah. Well, you bring up something because I've been managing social media for about 11 years for lots of school districts, and a few years ago I got my first really inappropriate picture, right? With that would be considered child pornography, and it was from one of my account managers, and she emailed it to me, and then I called the principal and said, "I'll send you the picture." And she's like, "No, no, no, no. That's again child pornography, and you don't want to
Hmm.
be able to share that." So I guess I just wanted to share in my own naive, not having to deal with it before, and probably everybody listening probably already knows that. But it's like if you get something in as the social media platform, or somebody private messages your account with something like that, you can definitely, I guess document it, but don't forward it to anybody until you like talk to the police and then figure out how you're supposed to get the picture there. Am I right in that?
Yeah, it's interesting. I hadn't thought about it. We know, for example, that teachers, any educator is a mandatory reporter. So
Hmm.
if they find out about this stuff, they're mandated to go to the police or, Department of Human Services. What I hadn't considered is folks like in your role. I mean, I don't think you're technically a mandated reporter because you sort of created this industry and this job, so it's not listed in statute that
Right.
social media managers are mandatory reporters. But I think it's good practice, it's best practice sort of to operate under that perspective because it helps kids. So yes, if you or one of your team members is made aware of one of these images or gets sent one of these images, I think you have to call the local police and they just have to investigate it honestly. And as I'm a criminologist by training, right?
Yep.
And I've done a lot of work with school resource officers across the country. I've spoken at the National School Resource Officer presentation. I did a visiting scholar position with the FBI for a year. But yeah, and I said it back then, and it's still somewhat true today that law enforcement aren't well equipped to handle this problem, right? Because they're going to focus on applying a law, and the laws that we have in Wisconsin and beyond are inadequate for dealing with child sexting. They just are. I've written a lot on our blog over the last couple of years about recommendations for a better sexting law and elements of a good sexting law because they're just not, they don't give law enforcement enough tools. Many realize now that, their hands are tied. And so it's like nothing or everything. And so we need some middle ground there. We need to recognize that not all sexting is sort of aggravated, malicious child pornography. Some of it's experimental, these kids who are just experimenting with their sexuality in adolescence and they're doing things we probably wouldn't want them to do, right? But we need other ways of handling it, and,
Mhm.
informal ways versus bringing them into the criminal justice system. But the laws haven't kept up with that, and educators are mandatory reporters, and they just unfortunately they just have to turn to the police and let the police handle it.
Yeah. Yeah. So I talked to the principal and then she's like, you got to call the police. So I called the police
Yep.
and I explained the whole thing. And then, my account manager had originally got it. So I'm like, here's her number if you need to
Hmm.
contact her. But, we're remote. So it
Yep.
happened, 3 hours away from us, but
Right.
here we are wherever we're located. It was just interesting. Luckily, it's only happened once. I pray that I
Well, if
pray.
you're in this business long enough, it'll probably happen again. Although, we haven't been able to collect data on sexting since 2019 because it's really difficult
Yeah.
surveying adolescents about these issues, and we've had challenges with samples. And anyways, anecdotally, I think it's getting better. I think kids are still doing it, obviously, but I think they're considering some of these other issues.
Hmm.
They certainly aren't surprised anymore when I share examples where kids have gotten into a lot of trouble because they're doing it. And when I speak with administrators, I share of the couple examples where I know um, principals and or like tech directors have gotten prosecuted criminally because they did exactly what you said. Like a principal shared it with this other person, and they've gotten prosecuted. Thankfully, in all the cases I'm aware of, the charges were eventually dropped, but
Yeah.
it was a headache for months and in one case over a year. So.
Oh, yeah, that's not good. Um, so if somebody wants to have you come to their school to do speaking, where should they contact you through the Cyberbullying Research
Yeah.
Center, or what's the best way?
Sure. I mean, yeah, Cyberbullying Research Center, we have a form you can fill out there. If you Google my name, Justin Patchin, you'll find all my other websites and contact information. Look me up on the university website. And even apart from the speaking, we have all sorts of free resources for parents, for educators, for teens on our website that they can use to help address these issues because, I can't be everywhere. And frankly, since COVID, I haven't really been doing as much. I was doing upwards of 70 to 80 events a year on top of my full-time teaching job. And then COVID hit and everything shut down, right? I wasn't flying anywhere. And I kind of liked it. I kind of liked staying home with my family and my kids in high school and going to his sporting things. And so I'm a little bit more selective these days, although if
Okay.
it's within driving distance,
Okay.
it's great because then I can, be in my own bed. But definitely reach
Yeah.
out. And if I'm not available, I can certainly direct people to other folks I trust that are available.
Okay. That'd be great. And so we'll have all those links in the show notes. So, and you have a lot of free resources. What are a couple, I know you've written a lot of books. So like if do you got two or three favorites that, like educators or parents would really appreciate when they're talking about this subject?
Yeah, our most popular book, we just published a new edition of it maybe a year and a half ago, is Bullying Beyond the Schoolyard, Preventing and
Okay.
Responding to Cyberbullying. So that's one that won a few awards and probably has sold the most. And it's been almost 10 years, 8, 10 years since we wrote a book for teens called Words Wound, Delete Cyberbullying and Make Kindness Go Viral. And so the apps and the platforms discussed in that book are probably outdated, but the general principles of kindness and combating cruelty online would still apply. Um, so again, there's a lot of good information out there, even free stuff on our website. And I'm also happy to, if people reach out to me through the website or whatever, to direct to resources specific to their concerns. Like if they're worried about, sexting, I definitely have resources on that. So.
Okay. Yeah, I just had somebody in my membership group that was asking about that, and I need to get him your name, so I'll definitely do that. Um, Before we kind of wrap up, we talked a little bit about technology in school. Is it good? Is it bad? And the whole thing on phones in schools. Do you have a stance on limiting cell phone use at school? And have you seen this impact student learning and reduce issues, like if cell phones are kind of removed or controlled a little bit more?
Yeah, and again, my perspective isn't so much based on research because I don't think there's a lot of good research to show, sort of like randomized controlled trials of phones in certain situations. But look, again, I typically default to giving the teacher the authority, especially in high school. Now, elementary school, obviously, they shouldn't have phones in school. Middle school, I think a case could be made where they shouldn't have their phones in schools. I
Mhm.
don't, I think they're pretty much can do everything they need to do without their device. In high school, it gets a little bit more complicated. And so I know many schools, the teachers will have the slots on the door where the kids can put their phones in there. I will tell you this, we know they're resilient. We also know that they're sort of they're creatures of habit, right? So if a teacher has a certain expectation about phones, like I don't want any phones in my classroom, and you got to put them in the pouch on the door, they're going to do it. I mean, they just will. And so the problem becomes when you don't enforce that, because then kids will say, "Well, Johnny's got his phone over there, or whatever." And so you got to be consistent with whatever. And so I know some principals like to say, "Well, we're not doing any phones because some teachers allow them, some teachers don't." And if you don't allow phones, that's fine, but there's still going to be some kids that use them and teachers that aren't willing to intervene when they see them. So I think giving uh, much of the power to the teacher to determine when and if those phones need to be used. I know it seems like a good middle ground, reasonable approach is, they can have them before class, after class, passing time, maybe even in the lunchroom. But if they become a problem, right? All the different behaviors we talked about earlier, that's when you have to make adjustments, and maybe they do lose their privileges for a period of time. Uh, but I think consistency, when it comes to kids, is really important. So they know what the rules are, so they can follow them.
Yeah, I listened to a presentation last summer of school in Nebraska that had implemented. I think it's the phones are basically banned from the beginning of the day to the end of
Hmm.
the day, and they, one noticed a lot more interaction, obviously, like at lunch
Hmm.
instead of staring at your
Hmm.
phone, but less violence.
Hmm.
They were having fights. It was a bigger school district, and with the use of phones and fights and people showing up and whatever. So it'd just be interesting to be able to get more data on that. I think yeah, it's definitely a discussion point with a lot of schools, and I think you have to teach how to handle it because
Hmm.
these students are then going to be workers out in the world, and so they do need to still know how to control themselves, or do you have it or not? But it's just interesting. Um, so as we wrap up, what would you say would be your best social media tip? I mean, I've got the folks listening are, social media storytellers for the schools, but what would be your best tip?
Well, don't let it control you, right? And you have control over your experience on social media. A lot of my friends will say, "Oh, there's just all sorts of terrible stuff on X or Facebook." And, you know, that's true. But you don't have to, expose yourself to that. You have a lot of tools within these platforms to manage your experience. So, liking certain things, disliking certain things, blocking certain things. There's actually software you can use to, put keywords in there so certain posts won't pop up in your social media. If you don't want to see anything about, a certain situation or person or whatever, you can manage those things. And the other thing is, don't be afraid, to distance yourself from certain people on social media. If they're just not a positive influence in your life, maybe you're friends on Facebook with this friend from high school, and they're just saying things that are inconsistent with your values. Block them, mute them, unfriend them. I mean, you want to make sure your experience on these platforms as positive as possible. And if people are impacting that negatively, you have control over that. And it shouldn't be you not going onto the platform that you enjoy. You can, silence those people. They don't even know that you're silenced. You're just not seeing their stuff. So use all the tools you have available to make it a positive experience. And if it's not a positive experience, then then don't use it, right?
Right.
And so you have all the control when it comes to that.
Yeah, it's boundaries, and sometimes,
Yeah.
it's boundaries with yourself and being able to take that control back. Well, that's a great tip. What a great conversation. I know that my listeners have really enjoyed learning from you. We'll definitely get your, is it cyberbullyingresearch.org? Is that the,
Yes, that's it.
okay.
No, cyberbullying.org. I think we
Okay.
actually do have cyberbullyingresearch.org too, but cyberbullying.org is our main website. Yeah.
Okay, so head on over there for a lot of free resources and definitely reach out. Justin's in Eau Claire, Wisconsin, not very far from where I live in Little New Auburn. So
Hmm.
yeah, if you're in driving distance for him, it'd be an amazing opportunity to have him visit your students and even your staff. I don't know, I'm sure you've done presentations to adults as well that are dealing with these types of issues, right?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. So, well, thank you so much for hanging out with us. And everybody, keep telling those stories. It can be a real we focused a lot on the negative, but Justin does believe it's a powerful tool, right? It can be really positive in the right way. So keep telling those stories for our schools because it really does make a difference. And we'll see you again next week. Bye bye.